Thank you for joining this beta for Decal Designer. I'm going to show you how all the options and the parameters work in Unreal 4. So there's some install notes included in the product itself, but just a quick recap for you. Firstly, you need to install Unreal Engine 4.26. I'll be supporting much earlier versions of Unreal, but for now I'm just using the latest. And then you want to go to the marketplace and search for Substance in Unreal Engine and install that to your engine. And that's the plugin that you're going to use to generate the decals. Next, you're going to come over to Unreal and just make sure in your settings, plugins, and then you just search for Substance here and just make sure that that's enabled. It might ask you to restart if you haven't got that already enabled. Once you've placed the Decal Designer content in your content folder and restart Unreal, you'll see it show up in your content folder here. So you just want to come to Decal Designer and go to your maps and just load up the very quick beta map. So there's a couple of tips here for starting. You need obviously the plugin, which I showed you here. If you click on this little icon and open the URL, that'll bring you to the Substance plugin if you haven't already found it. And there's also a little feedback section in case you want to give me some feedback on what you think is working and what's not. And the top 15 responses will get a free copy on the full release. So you can see here I've just placed a single instance of the Decal Designer here in the level. And this is just a regular decal actor. So if we want to start editing this decal itself, you can just find the material in the content browser itself. And this is what the assets look like. You've got the instance factory. This is like the source for creating all the different variants of the decals that you want. And then you've got the graph instance. So this is where I'm editing this particular decal that we've got placed here. So all these textures that are being output from the graph instance are being used in this simple material instance for now. I've got a very simple master material for now that's just hooked into the textures. I've got a much more comprehensive master material planned for final release with things like world space UVs and all that sort of thing. You can also switch to using packed textures as well. That just limits the number of textures to 3. For now, we'll just leave it as unpacked just so you can see what's actually going on with the different outputs from the Substance graph. So we're just going to hide that for now because we don't need it. If you want to edit the textures actually being created, you want to double click on this Substance graph instance. This brings up the main window for Decal Designer, which is all the parameters and stuff that I've created so far that you can use. So I've got a couple of tips for just speeding up your workflow as you're generating the decal. I tend to work in 1024 by 1024 when I'm setting all the various parameters. If you go straight to 2K or 4K, it's having to output a lot of raw texture detail. And so you might find it a little bit slow when you're trying to figure out exactly what you want. So I tend to stick at a 1K resolution just while I'm working. It just speeds things up a little bit and you have a much quicker workflow. And then later you can say, okay, I'm pretty happy now. Let's just jump to 2K, or maybe I want to jump back down again. I just tend to not whack it up to full resolution straight out the gate, just because it will definitely slow down a little bit. Think about it, you're outputting at the moment here 7 textures, so that's 7 4K textures. No matter how fast the Substance graph is, that's going to take quite a while. So just leave it probably at, depending on the power of your machine, at about 1K, and then later on you can speed it up. Another very quick tip just before we start working, when Substance generates these textures, it also tries to generate all the MIP maps for the textures as well, which is what's used when the texture is viewed at a distance. While we're working on designing our decal, we don't really need texture MIP mapping, and it also will slow down the process a little bit as well. So another quick tip is that you can turn off texture streaming while working in the Decal Designer. Now this is only a temporary console command. When you load up Unreal again, the texture streaming will be enabled again if you forget to say leave it on, or you can re-enable it yourself. So what you do is press the console command key and search for texture streaming, which is this one here, and we want to set that to 0. So let's just disable texture streaming, and you'll find that it's also much quicker to work with Decal Designer because it's not having to generate all the MIP maps for all the different textures. And if you want to re-enable, just set that back to a value of 1. So 0 has disabled texture streaming. So I'm going to quickly just run through all the parameters just so you understand what's going on and my thought process when designing the parameters for use. At the top here, I've got all of my texture outputs, which have been generated by the substance instance. Say if I'm not using height or roughness or something like that, I can disable them here and you'll see that the textures don't get generated. Say if I'm using the combined texture packed mask, then I can leave that on and turn off the other ones. So that's what the outputs at the top do. Next, if you come down here, this is my resolution, so you can very quickly jump between the different resolutions. 2K and 4K will obviously take a little bit longer to generate, but you can see from here how flexible the texture generation is. Then you got your randomized seed. So because these are all procedural noises and materials, they've got various settings that will be randomized every time you click this. So you'll never really end up with the same texture twice. You can see here it always looks a bit different, and that's just using a single mask. Next up, we've got amount. That just is a global setting that just controls the overall amount of the decal that you want. The default is 0.5. Anytime you want to go back to the default parameter settings, just hit this little return to default button. The next two controls are probably the most important and will control most of the look of the Decal Designer itself. You've got a grunge A and a grunge B, and both of these get combined to give you your final result. So you can just have a single grunge, which is what we're showing here, and I can quickly jump between them. You can see how responsive it is at 1K resolution. That's why I tend to leave it there, just so I can very quickly iterate on what I'm working on. So we've got lots of different decal types here. There's more to come. I've got a lot more on my list. For now, I've just supplied 26 different decals that you can combine together. So let's just go for, say, number 5 here. And after having chosen our first grunge, we can then combine it with our second one. So this just multiplies them together. It's a simple combination of the two masks. So you can see there I've combined. So you can see there I've combined a kind of a droppy style mask with a sort of a streaky mask itself. The next parameter here is the A-B balance. So this just controls the balance between those two masks. If I pull it towards the left, it shifts more towards the grunge A, and over to the right towards grunge B. So you can fine tune exactly how much of that second mask you want in there, or if you want to remove the first one. So let's just tweak that down a little bit here. So we've got spots with a little bit of a streaky effect. The next parameter controls blending. So the default setting just multiplies them together, so it combines them together. The second blend mode subtracts one mask from the other. So we've got these dots here, and we've got a sort of a streaky texture. If I move that to number 2, you can see now the dots are being erased by the second streaky texture. And again, with the blend balance, you can control how much of that is being removed. So if I come all the way over to here, and then in the middle here for this particular blend mode, it flips the opposite direction. So now we've got these streaks, and they're slowly being erased by the dropping sort of shapes of the first blend mask. So it's quite useful for either combining them together or erasing one from the other. So at the moment, my decal has hard edges around the edge. You can see if I copy the decal itself, all of the materials themselves are procedural, and because they're procedural, they're all perfectly tiling. So that's no matter what you do on the left here, you can't really break the tiling of the decal itself. That's a really powerful feature that will come in handy later when we're doing world space decals and things like that. So you can see for the moment that it's perfectly tiling, but I've got hard edges around the edge. That's not always exactly what you want. Say you want to have an edge alpha, depending on the shape that you want. That's what the edge mask feature does here. So you can quickly slide between a couple of different preset shapes that I've created for you here. So we've got a sort of a chamfered square, and we've got a more of a round shape. This is a bit more of a pyramid style shape. We've got a gradient from one edge towards another, and then we've got a gradient starting in the center and fading off towards the side. So this might be, for example, useful on, say, a road or something, maybe where you want to have it continuous and tiling in the center, but fades off towards the side. It's probably worth saying that all of the controls here are quite global, and these are probably the most important controls, so I've tried to keep them at the top. And then some of the finer tuning controls are sort of later on. So that's why we've got contrast next. We can control how contrasted and sharp the mask is. And finally, a global opacity. So pulling that down will just reduce the opacity altogether on all the channels that we're using. Next, we've got an invert mask feature. This very quickly just inverts the black and white mask that we're using. You'll note that it doesn't invert the edge mask because that's not always what you want, but later on maybe you do decide you want to invert the edge mask, and we've got a control down here in the advanced mask controls that just inverts the edge. So this could again be useful for road, but maybe you say you want dirt run along the sides and not in the center. If we come down to the advanced mask controls, this is where I've put some of the finer tweaks for the masks that we've selected. So we've got an edge balance here. This just controls the fall off of the edge mask that we're using. So if I invert that again and say bring us back to one of the simpler masks, say this one here, you can see here with the edge balance, I can control the fall off of that edge mask. We've got a contrast control for that, for how sharp. So if you've got really sharp dirt or really soft dust, you've got control for that. Next, you've got edge disorder. So that just controls how broken up that edge mask is. So this is a little bit of disorder. This is none. This is a bit more the default sort of square shape. And it comes to the right and we start to disrupt that edge a lot more. You've also got a scale setting. That's just a control for how repeated that edge breakup sort of noise is. We've already covered edge invert, and the final setting here is a mask debug view. This colorizes everything solid red and sets all the roughness or normal parameters just to a default baseline. This is just very handy for seeing what's exactly going on with your mask, because sometimes you can set so many settings that you're not sure exactly what your mask is looking like. So this is just a quick way of seeing how your mask actually looks for your decal. Next up, we've got some global tiling controls. So we can just control how many times those two masks are being tiled. It doesn't affect the edge mask because, of course, you don't really want that repeated. Later on, there might be some more controls for independently scaling one layer of grunge versus the other. So say you want these dots smaller, but you want to keep the streaks the same size. I'll be adding those controls later. I just wanted to hit the sort of big ones first. You can, of course, offset the grunge. So down here, you've got rotation. So you can rotate the actual masks themselves. Or if you turn off tile safe rotation, you can actually do a much finer rotate. But of course, this will affect the tiling. So if I just turn off that edge mask really quickly, you can see that obviously breaks the tiling if you turn off the tile safe rotation. Whereas if we have it on, we've still got our perfect tiling going on. So now if we scroll down, we've got some base color options here. So by default, we're just using a single color. So I can change this maybe to a sort of a red color. So this just colorizes a single color of red. If you want to do more complex colorization, we can switch to two colors. So now we've got red and white. So I'll just change it to a kind of contrasting color just to show you what's happening. By default, when you set the colors to 2, it sort of masks based on the 2 grunges that we chose earlier. So we've got red dots and we've got green streaks. If you come down a little bit further, you've actually got some extra controls for that colorization. So you can control where that mask position is for that green color. So you can control the fall off of that green second color that we've chosen, as well as the range. So this is quite handy for just say you want a very limited amount of that second color being shown. Adjust these mask positions and ranges. And finally, you've got 3 color mix. So we can then pick 3 contrasting colors just so you can sort of see what's actually going on. So if I bring down that range a little bit, you'll see that we've got sort of red in the center, and we've got green in the middle, and then pink towards the edges. And again, we can control that via the range. So you can use this to create mosses and grunges and all sorts of things. I find with this 3 color blend, you can pretty much achieve most material responses that you want on the base color side. We've also got base color disorder. So if we just come in a little closer and have a look, this is just sort of adding and take away light and dark pixels to this base color so that it's not just say a solid mix of these 3 colors. So if I just bring that up here, you can see we're introducing a little bit of noise into that base color, as well as the scale. So if you come down to the left here, it creates a very big, large, sort of soft disorder. And we come all the way to the right, it's a very noisy, fine disorder that's adding in here. So this is a simple opacity slider for that disorder. And if we come right back to the top, I'm just sort of getting ahead of myself. There's a little bit of a base color mask influence here at the top. So this is a mask that sits on the top. to combine these colors with a natural sort of fall off. This mask sort of multiplies over the top, and in this case it's multiplying down, so it's sort of darkening the textures but maybe giving them a little bit of localized sort of almost like ambient occlusion or something that sort of blends them together better. You can choose the blend mode for that mask. So here we go, add subtract. So if I bring this back in again, you can see we're adding white to some pixels and black to some other pixels, and overlay is just sort of like a softer version of the same. So again, with these three blend modes, again, we can add interest to our base color so that it's not just three solid colors. That might be the look you're looking for, but sometimes a little bit of disorder of this base color goes a long way to making your materials more believable looking. So that was the base color controls. If we come down a little bit further, we've got some roughness controls. So pull this all the way to the left, you can see we've got a less rough response for our decal. So this is now a much shinier decal itself. It is a little bit controlled at the beginning by the amount that the decal is applied to the surface. So if we come back up to our amount, you can see if I make the amount greater, you'll see that the roughness will show through more just because there's less opacity in the way breaking it up. You've also got roughness disorder. If I come back here and have a look in that little puddle here, we've got a little bit of disorder creeping in, a bit like the base color, just something to break up the even response of the roughness map, as well as a scale value. So again, this shifts between big, softer shapes and smaller, noisier shapes just to break up that roughness. So we've also got a roughness mask spread. If you pull to the left, it starts to bring in the roughness away from the edge of the decal, and to the right spills it out a bit further. And finally, we've got roughness mask contrast, that just controls the sharpness of that roughness mask. So if I bring the mask back in, the spread back in, you can see it's much sharper edge to that roughness mask, and just soften it off there on the left. Next up, we've got some normal controls. So just enable the normal map here. So I'll just come back a little bit. So you can see now we've got a normal response for our decal. We've got an intensity slider, which controls how much normal has been generated from the decal. Softness, just if you want to round it off, soften the actual normal map that's generated, as well as a balance. So you can control where in the mask the normal map is being generated from. It's a bit like a slice through feature. It's quite handy for certain looks, like say concrete that's been chipped away or whatever. You can create nice flat planes and then deep recesses. And finally, again, you've got a normal map contrast, again, which just crunches the sort of mask that's been used to generate this normal map. Finally, you can invert the normal here, just in case you didn't want it to push outwards. You can recess downwards with the normal map itself. So if we just come back up to the top again, one of the sort of more powerful things about this Decal Designer is the fact that all of the settings that we've input down below for this material response are still being driven by these 2 or 3 masks at the top, and also the random seeds. So say you want this look like, say, blood sitting on the top of a surface. So we'll reverse the normal for a second again, but it's not quite exactly how you want it. You can just hit the random seed. Hit the random seed, and you can see you sort of get an infinite variation of a subtle tweak on what you had chosen earlier. And you can always come back to the amount. Say you want to reduce the amount itself, or increase it, or even change what the maps that you were using to blend together. So we can very quickly jump between the masks that we were using to drive this decal in the first place. Let's play with the balance a little more, bring in that sort of that scratchy look instead, and let's reduce maybe the normal intensity a little bit. And now we've got some sort of dark, bloody splatter. So let's maybe change that green to a color that makes more sense, maybe a bit like a red, sort of a more darker, desaturated red. And don't forget, we've got this pink going on here as well, so we'll bring that down as well. Maybe it's a bit more dried out. And now we can play with the mask positions and the range. So, this blood is sort of dried out, it's a bit old, it's not quite fresh blood anymore. And we'll play with the roughness mask spread. Let's maybe bring in that wet pool just to sort of live in the center where the fresher blood is. So now all of a sudden we've got maybe bloody splattered. And again, if that's not quite exactly what we want, we can just hit the random seed until we're happy. If you save this number or copy this number back out again, you'll get the exact same result you had it before. So it's not quite infinitely random. It's actually based on a seed number. So you can see from that, you can very quickly generate thousands of decals just based on a few parameter settings. Right now, I've just got 26 masks in here, but there's plans for a whole lot more. I've got a whole list on my Trello board if you want to check that out, or even suggest some particular decals that you like. Finally, at the bottom here, we've got a metallic slider in case you're dealing with a metallic surface. And at the bottom, there's some custom inputs allowed. So you could say, oh, I want a custom grunge mask, and you just input any texture into here, and it'll be used to drive the grunge itself. Or you want a custom edge mask, which is this guy around the outside, and you can plug him here in the bottom and he'll drive the edge mask itself. So let's drag this Unreal logo here and input it as a grunge input. If I enable that now, and now you can see we're using the Unreal 4 logo in combination with one of our other masks to create a decal. So I can play with this second blend material. I can adjust the balance, maybe so they're sort of half faded into each other. I can change the edge mask to be something like that. You can see here it's slightly offset. So if we go back to our tiling and reset that back to center, and see now very quickly we've got this sort of bloodied Unreal logo, or we could even invert it and have it the other way around. So having the Unreal logo being the solid. You can see how this would be useful for decals or graffiti or anything like that. And change the amount and play with the balance a little bit, maybe change the second grunge. So you can see how you could easily very quickly do road markings. Let's just change that to white, and we've got a simple road marking using the Unreal 4 logo. And we just adjust the balance just so we can see that a little bit better. So like I said, at the bottom, you got complete control with your own custom grunge or your own custom edge. So if you want to just import normal textures, that's totally fine here. So thanks for taking a quick look. If you spot any issues or bugs, please click on this guy here and follow the URL, and you can enter any bugs or feedback or suggest some improvements. And there's also a link there to the Trello board showing the full feature list. Cheers, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to try the Decal Designer beta.